The stagecoach rattled violently as it hit another rut in the road, jostling Josephine Jones awake from her fitful slumber. She clutched her worn carpet bag closer to her chest and peered out the dust-streaked window at the parched Texas landscape. After 3 weeks of grueling travel from Philadelphia, she was finally nearing her destination, San Angelo, Texas. The year was 1878, and at 22 years old, Josephine was about to meet the man she had agreed to marry through a mail-order bride arrangement. The advertisement had seemed straightforward enough. Successful cattle rancher seeks educated Eastern woman of good moral character for marriage, must be willing to adapt to frontier life. Send correspondence to Clive Michaels, Box 217, San Angelo, Texas. Josephine had responded with a carefully worded letter and a daguerreotype that showed her at her most presentable, hair neatly arranged, wearing her Sunday best, with a slight smile that revealed none of the desperation that had driven her to answer the advertisement in the first place. After her father's death 6 months ago, the debts he'd accumulated had left Josephine and her ailing mother destitute. When her mother passed shortly after, Josephine had been left entirely alone in the world, with no relatives willing to take her in and few prospects for a respectable woman to support herself. The exchange of 3 letters had been enough for both parties to agree to the arrangement. Mr. Michaels had sent train and stagecoach fare, and Josephine had packed her few remaining possessions to head west, hoping that frontier life would offer the fresh start she so desperately needed. San Angelo coming up in about 10 minutes, folks, the driver called back to the passengers. Josephine straightened her travel-worn skirts and attempted to tidy her hair. She winced as her fingers caught in tangled auburn strands. After days on the road, she knew she looked far from her best, but surely Mr. Michaels would understand. She had brought her best dress, carefully wrapped in tissue paper at the bottom of her trunk, which was strapped to the roof of the coach. She would change and make herself presentable as soon as possible after arrival. The stagecoach slowed as they approached the town, and Josephine caught glimpses of San Angelo through the window. It was larger than she had expected, with a proper main street lined with wooden buildings. There was a general store, a bank, what appeared to be a hotel, and several saloons. The streets were busy with horses, wagons, and people going about their business. When the stagecoach finally pulled to a stop in front of the stage depot, Josephine waited for the other passengers to disembark before gathering her carpet bag and carefully stepping down. The hot Texas sun immediately beat down on her, and she squinted against the brightness. She set her bag down and looked around, hoping to spot Mr. Michaels in the crowd. He had described himself as tall with brown hair and a mustache, a description that could fit half the men in sight. A group of cowboys had gathered near the depot, laughing and talking among themselves. Josephine hesitated, then approached them. "Excuse me, gentlemen, I'm looking for Mr. Clive Michaels. Would any of you happen to know him?" The men fell silent, exchanging glances before erupting into laughter. Josephine felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, though she wasn't sure what had caused their amusement. "You must be the mail-order bride," one of them said, looking her up and down with an expression that made Josephine want to shrink into herself. "I am indeed engaged to marry Mr. Michaels," she said, trying to keep her voice steady and dignified despite her discomfort. This prompted more laughter from the men. "Oh, you're engaged to Clive, are you?" another said, wiping tears of mirth from his eyes. Before Josephine could respond, a deep voice cut through the laughter. "That'll be enough, boys." The group parted to reveal a tall man striding toward them. He was indeed tall, with brown hair and a mustache, as the letters had described, but the description had failed to capture his presence. His shoulders were broad beneath a worn denim shirt, and his face was tanned from long days under the sun. His eyes, a startling clear blue, fixed on Josephine with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Miss Jones, I presume?" he said, tipping his hat slightly. "Yes, Mr. Michaels," she replied, hoping she had found her intended. "Clive Michaels, at your service." He turned to the men who were still snickering. "Show them your pride, Miss Jones. Don't let these jackasses get to you. They've never seen a proper Eastern lady before." Josephine straightened her spine and lifted her chin. meeting the eyes of the laughing cowboys with as much dignity as she could muster. "I assure you, gentlemen, whatever amusement you find in my situation is entirely lost on me. I have traveled a great distance to begin a new life here, and I would appreciate a modicum of respect." Her words, delivered with quiet firmness, seemed to have some effect. A few of the men had the decency to look abashed. Clive nodded approvingly. "Now, if you fellows will excuse us, I'd like to get Miss Jones settled after her journey." He gestured to a young man standing nearby. "Tommy, fetch Miss Jones's trunk from the coach." As Tommy hurried to obey, Clive turned back to Josephine. "I apologize for the reception committee. Word travels fast in a small town. I'm afraid the notion of me taking a wife has provided quite a bit of entertainment." "May I ask why that is so amusing to everyone?" Josephine asked, still feeling the sting of their laughter. A shadow crossed Clive's face. "That's a conversation for a more private setting. For now, let's get you to Mrs. Wilson's boarding house where you'll be staying until the wedding." "The wedding," Josephine repeated faintly, the reality of her situation suddenly hitting her. She was thousands of miles from everything familiar, about to marry a man she'd only just laid eyes on. "Unless you've changed your mind," Clive said, studying her face. Josephine thought of the empty life she'd left behind, the debts, the loneliness. "No," she said firmly. "I haven't changed my mind." "Good," he replied, picking up her carpet bag. "My wagon's this way." As they walked toward a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 horses, Josephine became acutely aware of the stairs following them. It seemed the entire town of San Angelo was curious about Clive Michaels's mail-order bride. The wagon ride to Mrs. Wilson's boarding house was mostly silent. Josephine stole glances at Clive, trying to reconcile the man beside her with the formal, somewhat distant letters they had exchanged. He handled the horses with confident ease, his strong hands guiding the reins expertly. "Your letters didn't mention that you were something of a local curiosity," Josephine finally said, breaking the silence. Clive's mouth twitched slightly. "Would you have come if I had told you?" "I suppose that would depend on the nature of your notoriety," she replied. He nodded, acknowledging her point. "Fair enough, I'm not an outlaw if that's what you're worried about." "That's reassuring, but it doesn't explain the laughter," Clive sighed. "I've been in San Angelo for 5 years. I came with nothing but determination and built my ranch from scratch. There are folks who respect that, and others who resent it, and some who think a man like me has no business bringing a refined Eastern lady to be his wife." "A man like you," Josephine prompted. Before Clive could answer, they arrived at a neat 2-story house with a small garden in front. "Here we are," he said, pulling the wagon to a stop. "Mrs. Wilson runs the most respectable boarding house in town. You'll be comfortable here until our wedding." A plump, gray-haired woman appeared on the porch as they pulled up. "You must be Miss Jones," she called warmly. "I've been expecting you." Clive helped Josephine down from the wagon, his hands strong and steady around her waist. The brief contact sent an unexpected thrill through her. "Mrs. Wilson, this is Miss Josephine Jones," Clive introduced them. "Miss Jones, Mrs. Margaret Wilson, the finest cook in all of Texas." Mrs. Wilson beamed at the compliment. Come in, come in. You must be exhausted after your journey. I've prepared the best room for you." Clive unloaded Josephine's trunk from the wagon and carried it inside and up the stairs to a pleasant room with a comfortable-looking bed, a washstand, and a small writing desk by the window. "I'll leave you to get settled," he said, setting down the trunk. "Perhaps we could meet tomorrow. I could show you around town." "I would like that," Josephine replied, suddenly shy. "I'll come by around 10 if that suits you." "It does." Clive nodded and turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Miss Jones, Josephine, I know this isn't easy, coming all this way to marry a stranger. I want you to know that if you decide this isn't what you want, I won't hold you to our arrangement. I'll even pay your fare back east if that's what you choose." The unexpected offer stunned Josephine. "That's very generous." "It's only fair," he said. "Good night, Miss Jones." After he left, Josephine sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the day's events. Mrs. Wilson appeared with a tray of food and hot tea. "You must be famished, dear," she said kindly. "Eat up and then get some rest. We can talk in the morning." "Thank you, Mrs. Wilson. May I ask you something?" "Of course, child." Why did those men laugh when I mentioned Mr. Michaels? What is it about him that makes the idea of him taking a wife so amusing? Mrs. Wilson sighed and set the tray down. Clive Michaels is a good man, one of the best I know. But he's had his share of hardships, and people can be cruel. It's not my story to tell, though. He should be the one to explain. With that cryptic answer, Mrs. Wilson left Josephine alone with her thoughts and her meal. Despite her exhaustion, sleep was long in coming as she wondered what she had gotten herself into. The next morning, Josephine woke to sunlight streaming through the curtains. After washing up and changing into a fresh dress, a simple blue cotton that had survived the journey relatively unwrinkled, she went downstairs to find Mrs. Wilson in the dining room serving breakfast to several other boarders. "Good morning, dear," Mrs. Wilson greeted her warmly. "Come, sit down and have some breakfast. Everyone, this is Miss Josephine Jones from Philadelphia. Miss Jones, these are my other boarders, Mr. Peterson, our school teacher, Miss Clark, who works at the general store and doctor, and Mrs. Hayes." Josephine exchanged pleasantries with the others as she took a seat. The conversation flowed easily, with the others politely inquiring about her journey and her impressions of San Angelo. No one mentioned Clive or the reason for her arrival, for which Josephine was grateful. After breakfast, Mrs. Wilson took Josephine aside. "Clive will be here soon. I thought you might like to know a bit about him before you meet again." "I would appreciate that," Josephine replied. "Clive came to San Angelo 5 years ago, as he probably told you. What he likely didn't mention is that he came with almost nothing to his name. He worked harder than any man I've ever seen, taking any job he could get, saving every penny. Eventually, he saved enough to buy a small plot of land outside town. Everyone thought he was crazy the land was considered worthless, but Clive discovered water where others hadn't bothered to look. He built that ranch through sheer force of will." Josephine nodded, impressed but still confused. "That doesn't explain the laughter." Mrs. Wilson hesitated. "No, it doesn't, but it's important you understand what kind of man he is. Whatever else you learn about him, remember that." Before Josephine could press for more information, there was a knock at the door. Mrs. Wilson went to answer it and returned with Clive. He was dressed much as he had been the day before, though his shirt was fresher and his hair had been neatly combed. He held his hat in his hands. "Good morning, Miss Jones," he said. "I hope you rested well." "I did, thank you, Mr. Michaels." "If you're ready, I thought we might take that tour of town I promised." Josephine fetched her shawl and bonnet, and they set out. San Angelo looked different in the morning light, busier, more vibrant. Clive guided her along the main street, pointing out the various establishments. "That's Jenkins' General Store, best place to get supplies. The bank, of course. Whitaker's Mercantile has the finest fabrics in the county, according to the ladies. The Frontier Hotel, they serve a decent meal in their dining room. And those are the saloons, which I'll assume you have no interest in visiting." Josephine smiled at that. "Your assumption is correct." As they walked, she was again aware of the stares and whispers that followed them. Some people nodded respectfully to Clive, while others seemed to deliberately look away. "Mr. Michaels," Josephine said quietly, "I can't help but notice the way people are reacting to us. To you, specifically. I think it's time you told me why everyone finds our arrangement so amusing." Clive sighed deeply. "You're right. You deserve to know before you decide whether to go through with this marriage." He guided her to a small park area with a bench. "Let's sit for a moment." Once they were seated, Clive seemed to struggle with where to begin. "Miss Jones, what do you know about the Civil War?" The question caught Josephine by surprise. "I was quite young when it ended, but I understand it tore the nation apart." "It did indeed. I fought in that war on the Union side. I was just a boy, really lied about my age to enlist. By the time it was over, I had seen things no man should see, let alone a boy." Josephine nodded, still unsure where this was leading. "After the war, I drifted west, looking for a fresh start. I ended up in Kansas, working on a cattle drive. That's where I met Jacob." Clive's voice softened on the name. "Jacob Thornton was the finest man I ever knew. Smart, brave, loyal to the bone. We became partners, pooling our resources to start our own ranch. We came to Texas together." Understanding began to dawn on Josephine. "Jacob was more than just your business partner, wasn't he?" Clive met her eyes directly. We were, together, as more than friends. Despite her Philadelphia upbringing, Josephine was not entirely naive. She had heard whispers of such relationships, though they were never openly discussed in polite society. "What happened to him?" she asked quietly. Pain flashed across Clive's face. "Pneumonia 2 winters ago. He was gone before I could even get the doctor from town." "I'm sorry for your loss," Josephine said, and meant it. Clive nodded his acknowledgement. "After Jacob died, I threw myself into building the ranch. It was all I had left of our dream. I've been alone since then. And that, Miss Jones, is why those men laughed. The idea of me, a man they believed had no interest in women, sending for a mail-order bride struck them as hilarious." Josephine sat in silence, processing this revelation. It certainly explained the reaction she'd received, but it raised new questions. "Why did you send for a mail-order bride, Mr. Michaels?" Clive looked out across the small park. "Loneliness, partly. The ranch is successful now, but success means little when you have no one to share it with. And practical considerations, too. I'm not getting any younger. I want children, a family to inherit what I've built, and I thought maybe we could build something good together, a partnership of mutual respect, if not love." The honesty of his answer moved her. "So you don't, that is, you aren't attracted to women," Clive finished for her. "Life isn't always so simple, Miss Jones. Jacob was the only man I ever loved that way. Before him, I courted girls like any other young man. And while I can't promise the kind of passion that romantic novels describe, I do find you very beautiful." Josephine blushed at the unexpected compliment. "What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Michaels? A real marriage, not just in name. I believe we could be good together, Miss Jones. I'm offering companionship, respect, security, and yes, a physical relationship that could give us children. I'm not asking for an answer right now. Take some time to think about it. As I said before, if you decide this isn't what you want, I'll understand." Josephine studied the man beside her. He was handsome, yes, but more importantly, there was an integrity about him that she respected. And she could not deny the practical advantages of the arrangement. "I appreciate your honesty, Mr. Michaels. I will need some time to consider." "Of course." He stood and offered her his hand. "Shall we continue our tour? I believe the church is having a social gathering this afternoon. It would be a good opportunity for you to meet more people in town." Josephine took his hand and rose from the bench. As they walked, she found herself wondering if she could build a life with this complicated man who had been so unexpectedly honest with her. The church social was being held in the yard beside the white clapboard building that served as San Angelo's main place of worship. Tables had been set up with food and drink, and nearly half the town seemed to be in attendance. Clive led Josephine toward a group that included an older man in a clerical collar. "Reverend Butler, I'd like you to meet Miss Josephine Jones. Miss Jones, this is Reverend Butler, who leads our congregation." The Reverend, a kindly-looking man with gray hair and spectacles, took Josephine's hand warmly. "Miss Jones, welcome to San Angelo. We're delighted to have you join our community." "Thank you, Reverend. It's a pleasure to meet you. Clive tells me you two are planning to wed. Have you set a date?" Before either could answer, a woman's sharp voice cut in. "So it's true. Clive Michaels is actually getting married." Josephine turned to see a striking blonde woman approaching, her expensive dress marking her as one of the town's more affluent residents. "Miss Jones, this is Victoria Caldwell," Clive said, his voice carefully neutral. "Her father owns the bank." Victoria barely glanced at Josephine before fixing her attention on Clive. "When I heard you'd sent for a mail-order bride, I simply couldn't believe it. After all, everyone knows your preferences." The deliberate cruelty of the remark made Josephine's breath catch, but Clive remained composed. "Victoria, I'd appreciate it if you'd keep your opinions to yourself." Victoria laughed, the sound brittle. "Oh, Clive, don't be so sensitive. I'm simply concerned for poor Miss Jones here. Does she know what she's getting into?" Before Clive could respond, Josephine stepped forward. "Miss Caldwell, I assure you that Mr. Michaels has been entirely forthright with me. And while I appreciate your concern, our arrangement is a private matter between us." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "How noble of you, Miss Jones. I wonder if you'll feel the same way when winter comes and you're alone in that big house while Clive is off visiting his friends in Austin." "That's enough, Victoria," Clive said, his voice hardening. "You're making a scene." "I'm making a scene. That's rich coming from you." Victoria's voice rose, attracting attention from nearby groups. "Everyone knows the truth about you, Clive. You can marry all the Eastern ladies you want, but it won't change what you are." The Reverend stepped in, his expression grave. "Miss Caldwell, this is hardly appropriate conversation for a church social." Victoria tossed her head. "Fine, I've said my piece." She gave Josephine a pitying look. "Good luck, Miss Jones, you'll need it." With that, she stalked away. An uncomfortable silence fell over the group. Josephine felt the weight of curious stares from all directions. She glanced at Clive and saw the rigid set of his jaw, the barely contained anger in his eyes. "Mr. Michaels," she said quietly, "perhaps we should continue our tour another time." He looked down at her, his expression softening slightly. "I'm sorry you had to witness that, Miss Jones." "It's not your fault," she replied. "And please call me Josephine." "Josephine," he repeated, as if testing the name. "I think you're right. Let me take you back to Mrs. Wilson's." As they walked away, the Reverend called after them, "Don't let Victoria spoil your day. She has her own reasons for being upset." On the walk back to the boarding house, Clive was quiet, his expression troubled. Josephine sensed there was more to the story with Victoria Caldwell than a simple case of town gossip. "Miss Caldwell seems to have a personal grievance with you," she observed carefully. Clive sighed. "Victoria's father, Edmund Caldwell, owns the bank and a good portion of the businesses in town. He had plans for Victoria to marry Jacob Thornton before he realized the nature of our relationship. When Jacob chose me, both Victoria and her father took it as a personal affront. They've been making things difficult for me ever since." "I see," Josephine said thoughtfully. "And she still harbors resentment after all this time. The Caldwells have long memories, especially when it comes to perceived slights." Clive shook his head. "I'm sorry you were subjected to that. It was unfair of her to involve you in old grudges." They had reached Mrs. Wilson's boarding house. Clive paused at the gate, turning to face Josephine. "I understand if this changes your mind about our arrangement," he said. "Victoria's outburst won't be the last difficulty we face if we go through with this marriage." Josephine considered his words carefully. "Mr. Michaels, Clive, I didn't come west expecting an easy life. I came seeking a new beginning, a chance to build something meaningful. The question isn't whether there will be difficulties, but whether we can face them together." Something like hope flickered in Clive's eyes. "And what's your answer to that question, Josephine?" "I don't know yet," she admitted, "but I haven't been scared off if that's what you're asking." He smiled then, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him, transforming his face and making her heart skip a beat. "That's a start. Would you allow me to call on you tomorrow? I'd like to show you my ranch if you're willing." "I'd like that," she replied. "I'll come by around 9 then." Clive tipped his hat. "Good day, Josephine." As she watched him walk away, Josephine realized that despite the complications, she was intrigued by Clive Michaels. There was something compelling about his straightforward honesty, his quiet strength, and yes, even his complicated past. For the first time since arriving in San Angelo, she felt a spark of hope that perhaps this arrangement could work after all. That evening, as Josephine sat in Mrs. Wilson's parlor working on some mending, the landlady joined her with a pot of tea and a plate of cookies. "I heard about what happened at the church social," Mrs. Wilson said, pouring tea for both of them. "Victoria Caldwell has always had a sharp tongue." "It was uncomfortable," Josephine admitted, "but Mr. Michaels Clive handled it with dignity." "He's good at that," Mrs. Wilson said approvingly. "He's had to be." She studied Josephine over her teacup. "He told you about Jacob then?" Josephine nodded. "Yes, he was very honest. That's Clive for you, honest to a fault sometimes." Mrs. Wilson set down her cup. "What are you thinking, dear? Will you go through with the marriage?" "I'm still considering it," Josephine said. "He's taking me to see his ranch tomorrow." "The Diamond M is impressive," Mrs. Wilson said, using the name of Clive's ranch for the first time. "He's built something special there. Can I ask you something, Mrs. Wilson? You seem to know Clive well." "I've known him since he first came to San Angelo. He and Jacob boarded here briefly before they bought their land." "Do you think That is, could he be happy in a marriage with me? Truly happy, I mean. Mrs. Wilson considered the question carefully. Happiness is a complicated thing, Miss Jones. Clive loved Jacob deeply, there's no denying that. But before Jacob died, I heard him say more than once that he worried about Clive being alone if anything happened to him. Jacob wanted Clive to find companionship, maybe even love again. But with a woman. Jacob knew that Clive had courted women before they met. He used to tease him about it sometimes. Mrs. Wilson smiled at the memory. The heart isn't as simple as some would have us believe. Clive has a great capacity for caring. I believe he could build a good life with you, a happy one even, if you're both willing to work at it. Josephine found comfort in the older woman's words. Thank you, Mrs. Wilson. That helps. Just remember, dear, whatever you decide, make sure it's what you truly want. Don't let Clive's past or Victoria's nastiness push you into a decision either way. Josephine nodded, appreciating the wisdom. I won't. Later, as she prepared for bed, Josephine found herself thinking about Clive's proposal. A marriage of companionship and mutual respect, he had said. Perhaps not the romantic love she had once dreamed of, but something real and solid nonetheless. Could she be content with such an arrangement? And what of the physical aspect he had mentioned? The thought sent an unexpected flush of warmth through her. She fell asleep thinking of Clive's smile and wondering what his ranch would be like. The next morning, Josephine dressed with particular care, selecting a practical but flattering green dress that complemented her auburn hair. At precisely 9 o'clock, she heard the sound of a wagon pulling up outside. Clive helped her into the wagon with the same gentle strength he had shown before. As they drove out of town, the buildings gave way to open country, and Josephine was struck by the beauty of the Texas landscape. The sky seemed impossibly vast, stretching endlessly above them. It's beautiful, she murmured. Different from Philadelphia, I imagine, Clive said. Very different, but beautiful in its own way. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the rhythmic clop of the horses' hooves and the creak of the wagon creating a soothing backdrop. Tell me about your life in Philadelphia, Clive said eventually. Josephine told him about her childhood, her father's work as a clerk in a shipping company, her mother's gentle guidance. She spoke of her education, which had been better than most girls received, thanks to her father's belief in the importance of learning. And she told him, more hesitantly, about the financial troubles that had followed her father's death. He had made some unwise investments, she explained. When he died, the creditors came calling. We lost almost everything. My mother never recovered from the shock and strain of it all. When she passed, I had nowhere to turn. I'm sorry, Clive said simply. That must have been extremely difficult. It was, she acknowledged. But in a strange way, it prepared me for this, for starting over completely, he nodded, understanding in his eyes. Starting over takes courage. Not everyone has it. As they crested a gentle rise, Clive reined the horses to a stop. There it is, he said, a note of pride in his voice. The Diamond M spread before them was a broad valley with a clear creek running through it. A substantial 2-story house stood near a cluster of outbuildings, including a large barn and several corrals. In the distance, cattle grazed on the lush grass. It's lovely, Josephine said, and meant it. You've built all this in just 5 years. Jacob and I started it together, Clive corrected gently. But yes, most of the expansion has happened in the last 3 years. After he died, I threw myself into the work. He clicked to the horses, and they continued down the slope toward the ranch. As they approached, a lean, weathered man emerged from the barn. That's Frank Mitchell, my foreman, Clive explained. He's been with me almost from the beginning. Frank raised a hand in greeting as they pulled up in front of the house. Morning, boss, he called. This must be Miss Jones. Frank, this is Miss Josephine Jones, Clive confirmed as he helped Josephine down from the wagon. Josephine, Frank Mitchell. Pleasure to meet you, madam, Frank said, tipping his hat. Boss has been talking about your arrival for weeks. Has he now? Josephine said, glancing at Clive, who actually looked a bit embarrassed. Don't believe everything Frank tells you, Clive said. He's prone to exaggeration, Frank grinned. Only when it comes to the size of the fish I catch, everything else is gospel truth. He turned back to Clive. The new calves in the north pasture are doing well, and that bay mare finally foaled a fine colt's strong legs. Good news all around then, Clive said. We'll check on the mare later. For now, I'm going to show Miss Jones the house. Madam, Frank said with a nod before heading back to the barn. Clive led Josephine up the steps to the wide porch that wrapped around the front of the house. I built this house with Jacob, he said quietly as he opened the door. We had plans to fill it with life. The interior was surprisingly pleasant. The front door opened into a large, comfortable sitting room with a stone fireplace and several well-made pieces of furniture. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes that spoke of varied interests. You have quite a library, Josephine observed, running her fingers along the spines of the books. Reading is one of my few luxuries, Clive admitted. Jacob used to tease me about it, said I'd turn into a professor if I wasn't careful. Josephine smiled at that. My father was the same way. He believed books were the gateway to understanding the world. A man of wisdom, your father. Clive showed her through the rest of the house. A formal dining room, a well-equipped kitchen with a modern stove, a small study, and upstairs, 4 bedrooms, including the master bedroom with its large 4-poster bed. This would be our room, Clive said matter-of-factly, though Josephine noticed a slight flush on his cheeks. The others could be for children or guests until we have need of them for family. The casual mention of children sent a flutter through Josephine's stomach. It's a beautiful house, she said, moving to the window which offered a view of the ranch. You've thought of everything. Not everything, Clive replied. It needs a woman's touch, your touch if you decide to stay. Josephine turned to face him. And if I do decide to stay, what would my role be here, beyond being your wife and the mother of your children? Whatever you want it to be, Clive said. I know some men expect their wives to do nothing but keep house and raise children, but I've never understood that limitation. If you're interested in the running of the ranch, I'd welcome your input. If you have other interests or skills, I'd encourage you to pursue them. His answer surprised and pleased her. Most men wouldn't be so open-minded. I'm not most men, Josephine. No, she agreed softly. You're not. They stood looking at each other for a long moment, and Josephine felt something shift between them, a new awareness that made her pulse quicken. Clive cleared his throat. I thought we might have lunch by the creek if you'd like, Mrs. Hernandez. She comes in to cook and clean several times a week, left a picnic basket for us. That sounds lovely, Josephine said. They collected the basket from the kitchen and walked to a pleasant spot by the creek, where a large oak provided shade. Clive spread a blanket on the grass and unpacked the basket, revealing sandwiches, fried chicken, apple pie, and a jug of lemonade. As they ate, the conversation flowed easily between them, touching on books they had read, places they had seen or hoped to visit, and their thoughts on everything from politics to the proper way to make cornbread. Jacob and I used to argue about cornbread, Clive said, smiling at the memory. He liked it sweet, almost like cake. I prefer it savory with a crust that crackles when you break into it. I'm with you on that, Josephine said. Cornbread should be hearty, not dessert. Clive laughed, a warm, rich sound that Josephine realized she was hearing for the first time. Jacob would have liked you, he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. He always said I needed someone who would challenge me. Tell me more about him, Josephine said, genuinely curious. If we're to build a life together, I should know about the person who was so important to you. Clive looked surprised by the request, but then nodded. Jacob was vibrant, full of life and ideas. Where I'm cautious, he was impulsive. Where I plan, he would leap. But he was also steady when it counted, loyal to the bone. He could charm anyone, make friends in 5 minutes flat. And he loved this land as much as I do. Josephine could hear the love in his voice, the grief still raw after 2 years. He sounds like a remarkable man. He was, Clive agreed, but enough about the past. I want to know more about you, Josephine Jones. What makes you laugh? What do you dream about? The afternoon passed pleasantly as they continued to talk, getting to know each other in a way that their letters had only begun to explore. By the time they packed up the remnants of their picnic, the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon. We should head back to town, Clive said regretfully. I promised Mrs. Wilson I'd have you back by dusk. As they drove back toward San Angelo, Josephine found herself reluctant for the day to end. There was an ease between them now that hadn't been there before, a sense of connection that had surprised her. "Thank you for today," she said as the town came into view. "For showing me your home, for being so open with me." "I believe in starting as we mean to go on," Clive replied. "With honesty between us." He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of Mrs. Wilson's boarding house. "I have some business in town tomorrow, but I'd like to call on you the day after if that's acceptable. Perhaps we could discuss our future." Josephine nodded. "I'd like that." Clive helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering slightly at her waist. "Good night, Josephine." "Good night, Clive." As she watched him drive away, Josephine realized that her decision was becoming clearer with each passing day. There was something about Clive Michaels that spoke to her, some connection that went beyond the practical arrangements they had discussed. Whether it could grow into love, she couldn't say, but she was increasingly certain that she wanted to find out. The next day, Josephine found herself at loose ends, her thoughts continually returning to Clive and the Diamond M. Mrs. Wilson, noticing her distraction, suggested a visit to the general store to acquire some items Josephine might need. And afterward, Mrs. Wilson added with a twinkle in her eye, "We might stop by the milliner's. Mrs. Parker just got in some lovely new hat trimmings from back east." Josephine smiled, understanding the older woman's attempt to distract her. "That sounds like a fine plan, Mrs. Wilson." The general store was busy when they arrived, with several women examining bolts of fabric and men discussing the merits of various tools. Josephine was examining a display of writing paper when she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Well, if it isn't Miss Jones, still in town I see." Turning, Josephine found herself face to face with Victoria Caldwell, who was regarding her with undisguised hostility. "Miss Caldwell," Josephine acknowledged politely. "Yes, I'm quite enjoying getting to know San Angelo." Victoria's lips curled in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "And Clive Michaels, I presume? Has he shown you his precious ranch yet, the house he built with his friend?" "Yes, he gave me a tour yesterday," Josephine replied, refusing to be baited. "It's a lovely property. He's accomplished a great deal in a short time." "Indeed," Victoria said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Clive has always been ambitious, and now he's set his sights on respectability with a proper Eastern wife to complete the picture." Josephine maintained her composure, though her heart was beating faster. "Mr. Michaels has been entirely forthright with me about his past and his expectations for our marriage." Victoria laughed, the sound drawing attention from other customers. "Has he? How refreshing. And you're still considering his offer, knowing what kind of man he is." "The kind of man who works hard, speaks honestly, and treats others with respect," Josephine countered. "Yes, I am seriously considering his offer." Victoria's face hardened. "You're a fool, Miss Jones, or desperate. Which is it?" Before Josephine could respond, Mrs. Wilson appeared at her side. "Miss Caldwell, I believe your father is looking for you outside." Victoria glanced toward the window where Edmund Caldwell could indeed be seen waiting impatiently. "This conversation isn't over, Miss Jones," she said, before sweeping out of the store. "Don't let her upset you, dear Mrs. Wilson said, patting Josephine's arm. "Victoria has been nursing her grievances for years." "I'm not upset," Josephine replied, surprised to find it was true. "Just sad for her. It must be exhausting to carry so much bitterness." Mrs. Wilson looked at her with approval. "You know, I think you might be exactly what Clive needs." Later that afternoon, as Josephine was returning to the boarding house after their shopping excursion, she spotted Clive emerging from the bank. His expression was grim, and he didn't notice her until she called his name. "Josephine," he said, his face lighting up despite his obvious tension. "I thought you were spending the day with Mrs. Wilson." "We've just finished our shopping," she replied, gesturing to the small packages she carried. "Is everything all right? You looked troubled when you came out of the bank." Clive hesitated, then sighed. "Not particularly. Edmund Caldwell is making things difficult again. He's calling in a loan earlier than we agreed, claiming changed circumstances." "Because of me?" Josephine asked, dismayed. "Because of our potential marriage." "It's not your fault," Clive assured her. "The Caldwells have been looking for ways to pressure me for years. This is just the latest attempt." I ran into Victoria in the general store, Josephine admitted. She wasn't pleased to see me still in town. Concern crossed Clive's face. What did she say to you? Nothing I couldn't handle, Josephine replied with a small smile. I'm made of sterner stuff than she thinks. Clive's expression softened. I'm beginning to see that. He glanced up at the sky, which was darkening with approaching storm clouds. May I walk you back to Mrs. Wilson's? It looks like rain's coming. They had barely gone a block when the sky opened up, rain coming down in sheets. Without hesitation, Clive took Josephine's hand and pulled her toward the nearest shelter, which turned out to be the overhang in front of the mercantile. They stood close together, watching the downpour, both slightly damp from their brief exposure. Josephine was acutely aware of Clive's hand still holding hers, of his solid presence beside her. I'm sorry about your packages, he said, noticing that the paper wrapping on one had begun to disintegrate in the rain. It's just ribbon and writing paper, Josephine replied, looking up at him. Nothing that can't be replaced. Their eyes met, and something changed in Clive's expression, a softening, a vulnerability that made Josephine's breath catch. Slowly, as if giving her time to pull away, he reached up and brushed a raindrop from her cheek. Josephine, he said, his voice low, I know we agreed to discuss our future tomorrow, but I find I can't wait. Will you marry me? Not just because of our arrangement, but because I think we could build something good together, something real. The unexpectedness of the moment, the earnestness in his eyes, the gentle touch of his hand, it all combined to make Josephine's heart race. This wasn't the practical proposal she had expected, but something more, something that spoke of possibility and hope. Yes, she said, the word escaping her before she could overthink it. Yes, I will marry you, Clive. His smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. Without warning, he leaned down and kissed her, a gentle, questioning touch of his lips to hers. Josephine responded instinctively, her free hand coming up to rest against his chest. When they broke apart, both looked somewhat surprised by what had just happened. I hadn't planned to do that, Clive admitted, a slight flush on his cheeks, but I'm not sorry. Neither am I, Josephine replied softly. The rain began to ease, and they continued their walk to Mrs. Wilson's, still holding hands, both deep in thought about what had just transpired. At the boarding house door, Clive turned to Josephine once more. Shall we say 2 weeks from Sunday for the wedding? That will give us time to make arrangements and for you to be sure this is what you want. 2 weeks from Sunday, Josephine agreed, and Clive, I am sure. He smiled, lifted her hand to his lips for a brief kiss, then turned and walked away, his stride purposeful despite the mud and puddles. Mrs. Wilson was waiting in the parlor when Josephine entered. One look at Josephine's face told the older woman all she needed to know. So you've made your decision, she said with satisfaction. Yes, Josephine replied, unable to keep the smile from her face. We're to be married 2 weeks from Sunday, Mrs. Wilson beamed. Then we have preparations to make, your dress, the flowers, the cake. Oh, it will be lovely, my dear. Simply lovely. As Mrs. Wilson began to list all that needed to be done, Josephine touched her lips, still feeling the gentle pressure of Clive's kiss. She had come west seeking security and a new beginning. She was finding that, and something more, the possibility of happiness, of connection, perhaps even of love. The next 2 weeks passed in a flurry of activity. Mrs. Wilson took charge of the wedding preparations with enthusiasm, enlisting the help of several ladies from the church to sew Josephine's wedding dress, bake the cake, and arrange for flowers. Clive, meanwhile, was busy with ranch business and preparing the house for his bride. They saw each other almost daily, their comfort with each other growing with each meeting. Sometimes they rode out to the ranch together or walked along the creek that ran behind the church, talking about their plans for the future. Other times, they simply sat on Mrs. Wilson's porch, reading aloud to each other from Clive's collection of books. The day before the wedding, Josephine was at the mercantile picking up the last of the items she needed for her trousseau when Victoria Caldwell appeared once more. I hear congratulations are in order, Victoria said, her voice brittle. The whole town is talking about tomorrow's wedding. Thank you, Josephine replied, determined to remain civil. We're looking forward to it. Victoria studied her for a moment, then said in a lower voice, You know he'll never love you the way he loved Jacob. You'll always be second best." Instead of the hurt Victoria clearly intended to inflict, Josephine felt only pity for the other woman. "Love isn't a competition, Miss Caldwell. Clive's love for Jacob is part of who he is, just as my past experiences have shaped me. We're building something new together, not trying to replace what came before." Victoria seemed taken aback by the response. She opened her mouth to reply, then closed it again, apparently at a loss for words. "I wish you well, Miss Caldwell," Josephine said sincerely. "I hope you find happiness." With that, she collected her purchases and left the store, leaving Victoria staring after her. When she recounted the encounter to Mrs. Wilson that evening, the older woman chuckled. "I would have paid good money to see Victoria Caldwell speechless. Well done, my dear." "I meant what I said," Josephine mused. "I do wish her happiness. It must be terrible to be so consumed by bitterness." "That's one of the things I admire about you," Mrs. Wilson said. "Your capacity for understanding." She patted Josephine's hand. "Now, get some rest. Tomorrow is your big day." The morning of the wedding dawned clear and mild, a perfect September day. Mrs. Wilson and Miss Clark helped Josephine dress in the simple but elegant white gown they had made, with a high collar and long sleeves of delicate lace. Her auburn hair was arranged in a soft updo, adorned with small white flowers. "You look beautiful, dear," Mrs. Wilson said, tears in her eyes. "Absolutely beautiful." The church was filled when Josephine arrived. It seemed that most of San Angelo had turned out for the event, curious to see the Eastern lady who had agreed to marry Clive Michaels. As the small band of musicians began to play, Josephine took a deep breath and started her walk down the aisle. Clive waited at the altar, looking handsome in a new black suit, his expression one of wonder as he watched her approach. Reverend Butler conducted the ceremony with warmth and sincerity. When it came time for the vows, Clive's voice was steady and sure. "I, Clive Michaels, take you, Josephine Jones, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to honor and cherish you, to provide for and protect you, to be faithful and true to you as long as we both shall live." When it was Josephine's turn, she looked into Clive's eyes and spoke from her heart. "I, Josephine Jones, take you, Clive Michaels, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to stand by your side in good times and bad, to build a home and a life with you, to be your partner and your friend, as long as we both shall live. By the power vested in me," Reverend Butler said with a smile, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride, Clive." Clive leaned down and kissed Josephine gently, his hand warm against her cheek. When they turned to face the congregation as Mr. and Mrs. Michaels, the applause was genuine and enthusiastic. The reception was held in the churchyard, with tables laden with food contributed by the ladies of the congregation. Josephine was introduced to dozens of people, many of whom welcomed her warmly to the community. Frank Mitchell, Clive's foreman, approached them with a wide grin. "Congratulations, boss," he said, shaking Clive's hand vigorously. "And to you, Mrs. Michaels, you've got yourself a good man there." "I know," Josephine replied, smiling up at her husband. As the celebration continued, Josephine noticed Edmund and Victoria Caldwell standing at the edge of the gathering, watching with stony expressions. Clive followed her gaze and frowned slightly. "Don't let them spoil our day," he said quietly. "They'll come around eventually, or they won't. Either way, it's their loss." As the sun began to set, Clive and Josephine bid farewell to their guests and climbed into the wagon that would take them to the Diamond M, their home. Josephine waved to Mrs. Wilson, who was dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, then settled back against the seat, suddenly shy in the knowledge that she was now Mrs. Clive Michaels. The ride to the ranch was quiet, both of them absorbed in their thoughts. When they arrived, Josephine was surprised to see the house glowing with the warm light of many lamps and lanterns. "Mrs. Hernandez," Clive explained as he helped her down from the wagon. "She wanted everything to be perfect for your arrival." Before Josephine could respond, Clive scooped her up in his arms, making her gasp in surprise. "I believe it's traditional," he said with a smile, carrying her up the steps and across the threshold into their home. Inside, the house was warm and inviting. A fire crackled in the sitting room fireplace, and the scent of fresh flowers filled the air. On the dining room table, a cold supper had been laid out, along with a bottle of champagne. "Are you hungry?" Clive asked, setting Josephine gently on her feet. "A little," she admitted. "We didn't get much chance to eat at the reception." They shared the meal, talking about the day, the guests, the future. As they finished the champagne, a comfortable silence fell between them. "Josephine," Clive said finally, "I want you to know that I don't expect. That is, I understand if you need time to adjust to our marriage before we." Josephine felt a rush of affection for this man who was trying so hard to be considerate of her feelings. "Clive," she said softly, reaching across the table to take his hand, "I knew what I was agreeing to when I said I would marry you. I'm your wife now in every sense of the word." Relief and something more intense flickered in his eyes. He stood and offered his hand. "Shall we retire for the evening?" Upstairs in the master bedroom, a single lamp burned low, casting a soft glow over the large bed with its crisp white linens. Josephine stood nervously as Clive closed the door behind them. "May I help you with your dress?" he asked, his voice gentle. Josephine nodded and turned, allowing him to unfasten the long row of tiny buttons down her back. His fingers were deft and sure, and she could feel the warmth of his breath on her neck as he worked. When the dress was undone, Josephine stepped away slightly, suddenly shy. I need a moment." Clive nodded in understanding. "Take your time, I'll be here." Josephine took her nightgown from the trunk that had been delivered earlier and stepped behind the screen in the corner of the room. As she changed, she could hear Clive moving about, the soft rustle of his clothes as he removed his suit jacket and vest. When she emerged, Clive was waiting, having removed his outer clothing but still wearing his shirt and trousers. He looked at her with such appreciation that Josephine felt her cheeks warm. "You are beautiful, Josephine," he said simply. He moved toward her slowly, giving her time to adjust to his presence, to the intimacy of the moment. When he reached her, he lifted a hand to gently touch her face, then leaned down to kiss her. This kiss was different from the ones they had shared before, deeper, more purposeful. Josephine responded instinctively, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. What followed was a discovery for both of them, a gentle, sometimes awkward, but ultimately tender exploration of each other. Clive was patient and considerate, guiding Josephine with soft words and gentle touches. And when they finally came together as husband and wife, Josephine found herself feeling not just the physical pleasure, but a deep, emotional connection that surprised her with its intensity. Afterward, as they lay together in the darkness, Clive's arm around her and her head on his shoulder, Josephine felt a contentment she had not expected. "Josephine," Clive murmured, his voice sleepy. "Thank you." "For what?" she asked, tracing a pattern on his chest with her fingertips. "For coming here, for taking a chance on me, for being you." Josephine smiled in the darkness. "Thank you for being worthy of the chance." She felt his kiss on the top of her head as she drifted off to sleep, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The first months of their marriage passed in a blur of adjustment and discovery. Josephine quickly took to ranch life, learning about the operations from Clive and Frank, developing a good relationship with Mrs. Hernandez, and making the house truly their home. Their physical relationship continued to develop, growing more comfortable and fulfilling as they learned each other's bodies and desires. But it was the emotional connection that surprised Josephine most, the easy conversations, the shared laughter, the quiet moments of understanding that required no words. Winter came early that year, with a bitter cold snap in November that had the ranch hands working double shifts to protect the cattle. Clive was often out from dawn until well after dark, coming home exhausted but always taking time to talk with Josephine, to hear about her day, to share a meal and a few quiet moments before sleep claimed them both. One particularly cold night, Josephine was waiting up for Clive, who had gone out to check on a sick mare in the barn. When he finally came in, stomping the snow from his boots, she handed him a mug of hot coffee laced with whiskey. "You're a godsend," he said gratefully, warming his hands on the mug. "The mare's doing better. I think she'll be fine." "I'm glad," Josephine said, helping him out of his heavy coat. "You're half frozen." "It's bitter out there," Clive agreed, following her into the sitting room where a fire blazed in the hearth. He sank into his favorite chair with a weary sigh. Josephine watched him as he sipped the coffee, noting the lines of fatigue around his eyes. She had news for him, news she had been saving for the right moment. Perhaps now, when they were alone and quiet, was the time. "Clive," she said, perching on the arm of his chair, "I have something to tell you." He looked up, concern flashing across his face. "Is everything all right?" "Everything is wonderful," she assured him. "Clive, I'm going to have a baby." For a moment he simply stared at her as if not comprehending her words. Then a smile broke across his face, transforming his exhaustion into joy. "A baby, you're sure?" Josephine nodded. "Doctor Hayes confirmed it yesterday. We're going to have a child in early summer." Clive set down his mug and pulled her into his lap, holding her close. "Josephine, I don't have the words, I'm so happy." She felt the dampness of tears against her neck and held him tighter. "So am I, Clive." "So am I." As winter gave way to spring, Josephine's body changed with the growing life inside her. Clive watched these changes with wonder and concern, insisting that she rest more, that she allow Mrs. Hernandez to take on additional duties. "I'm pregnant, not ill," Josephine protested one afternoon when Clive found her helping to clean out the spring house. "I know," he said, taking the broom from her hands, "but you're carrying precious cargo, Mrs. Michaels, our child." The words, "our child," never failed to bring a smile to both their faces. News of the pregnancy spread through San Angelo, bringing a steady stream of visitors bearing gifts and advice. Even Victoria Caldwell seemed to have softened somewhat, nodding to Josephine when they passed each other in town. Mrs. Wilson was a frequent visitor, bringing handmade baby clothes and offering practical advice from her years of helping young mothers in the community. "You're blooming, my dear," she told Josephine during one visit. "Happiness suits you." As Josephine's due date approached, Clive arranged for a midwife to stay at the ranch. Sarah Johnson was a capable, no-nonsense woman who had delivered half the babies in the county. "First babies often take their time," Sarah told them. "But I'm here now, and will be ready when yours decides to make an appearance." The baby, however, had other ideas. 2 weeks before the expected date, Josephine woke in the night with sharp pains that left no doubt her time had come. "Clive," she gasped, clutching his arm, "it's starting." The next 18 hours were a blur of pain and effort for Josephine, and helpless anxiety for Clive, who was banished from the bedroom to pace the hallway outside. Sarah and Mrs. Hernandez worked tirelessly, encouraging Josephine, guiding her through the labor. Finally, as the sun was setting on the following day, the cry of a newborn filled the house. A few minutes later, Sarah opened the bedroom door to find Clive sitting on the floor of the hallway, his head in his hands. "Mr. Michaels," she said, her voice soft with emotion, "you have a son." Clive looked up, his face a mixture of exhaustion and hope. "And Josephine, tired but well, come meet your family." Clive entered the bedroom to find Josephine propped up on pillows, a small bundle in her arms. Her hair was damp with sweat, her face pale with exhaustion, but her eyes shone with love as she looked at the child in her arms. "Clive," she whispered as he approached the bed, "come see our son." He sat carefully on the edge of the bed and peered at the tiny red face of his child. A shock of dark hair, eyes screwed tightly shut, perfect little fingers curled into fists. "He's perfect," Clive breathed, reaching out to touch his son's cheek with one finger. "You're perfect, both of you." Tears streamed down his face as he leaned forward to kiss Josephine's forehead. "Thank you," he murmured against her skin. "Thank you for our son." They named the baby Jacob Daniel Michaels, honoring both the man who had been so important to Clive and Josephine's father. Little Jake, as they soon began to call him, became the center of their world. Life on the Diamond M settled into a new rhythm, now centered around the needs of their child. Josephine found motherhood both more challenging and more rewarding than she had anticipated. Clive proved to be an attentive father, often carrying Jake with him as he went about his work around the ranch house, talking to the baby as if he could understand every word. On a warm summer evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Jake asleep in his cradle beside them, Clive reached over and took Josephine's hand. "Are you happy, Josephine?" he asked, his eyes searching her face. "With this life with me?" She squeezed his hand, thinking of the journey that had brought her here, of the unexpected turns her life had taken. "I am happier than I ever imagined possible," she said honestly. "I came west seeking security, a chance at a new life. I found so much more." "So did I," Clive said softly. "When Jacob died, I thought that part of my life, the loving part, was over. I never expected to love again, certainly not like this." Josephine's heart seemed to stop. It was the first time either of them had spoken the word love in reference to their feelings for each other. "Like what?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Clive's eyes held hers, vulnerability and certainty equally present. "Completely. With my whole heart. I love you, Josephine Michaels, not as a replacement for what I lost, but as something entirely new and wonderful." Josephine felt tears well in her eyes. "I love you too, Clive. I think perhaps I have for some time." He leaned over and kissed her, a kiss that spoke of their journey together, of the trials they had faced and overcome, of the life they were building. As the years passed, the Diamond M prospered, and so did the Michaels family. Jake grew into a strong, curious boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's thoughtful nature. 2 years after Jake's birth, Josephine gave birth to a daughter, Emma Rose, and 3 years after that, another son, William Thomas, joined the family. San Angelo grew as well, becoming a thriving community. Edmund Caldwell eventually retired, turning the bank over to a younger man with more progressive ideas. Victoria married a cattleman from a neighboring county and moved away, seemingly finding some measure of the happiness Josephine had wished for her. Clive and Josephine became respected members of the community, known for their fair dealings and generosity. The scandal that had once surrounded Clive faded into memory, replaced by admiration for the family they had built together. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Clive surprised Josephine with a trip to Philadelphia. "It's time our children see where their mother comes from," he said, "and I want to see the city that produced such an extraordinary woman." The journey east was a far cry from Josephine's solitary trip west a decade earlier. Now she traveled with her husband and 3 children in comfort and style. In Philadelphia, they visited her parents' graves, and Josephine showed her family the places that had been important in her early life. "It seems so long ago," she mused as they stood outside the house where she had grown up, now occupied by another family. "Almost like it happened to someone else." "Are you ever sorry you left?" Clive asked, his arm around her waist. Josephine shook her head. "Never. Everything I love is with me now." They returned to the Diamond M in time for the fall roundup, slipping back into the rhythm of ranch life with ease. The children resumed their lessons with the tutor Clive had hired, and Josephine continued her work with the women's reading circle she had founded in San Angelo. Life wasn't always easy. There were droughts and harsh winters, illnesses and accidents, disagreements and misunderstandings. But through it all, Clive and Josephine faced each challenge together, their bond strengthening with each passing year. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching their children play in the yard, Clive turned to Josephine with a smile. "Do you remember the day you arrived in San Angelo?" he asked. "Those cowboys laughing at the mail-order bride." Josephine chuckled at the memory. "I was so embarrassed and confused. And then I told you to show them your pride," Clive continued. "Do you know why I said that? I always assumed you wanted me to stand up to them, to not let them intimidate me." "That was part of it," Clive agreed. "But it was more than that. I saw something in you the moment you stepped off that stage, coach, a dignity, a strength that had nothing to do with fine clothes or social standing. You had true pride, the kind that comes from knowing your own worth. I admired that immediately." Josephine leaned against his shoulder, watching as Jake helped Little Will climb onto the wooden horse Clive had built for the children. Emma was sitting nearby, deeply absorbed in a book. "It's funny how life works out," she said softly. "If my father hadn't made those bad investments, if my mother hadn't passed away, I would never have answered your advertisement. I would never have come west. Our children wouldn't exist." "Are you getting philosophical in your old age, Mrs. Michaels?" Clive teased, pressing a kiss to her temple. Hardly old, she protested with a laugh. But yes, perhaps a bit philosophical. I was just thinking about how the hardest moments of our lives can lead to the greatest joys if we have the courage to keep going, to take chances. Like a Philadelphia lady agreeing to marry a Texas rancher she'd never met. Exactly like that, Josephine agreed. The best decision I ever made. Clive pulled her closer. Mine too, Josephine, mine too. As the sun set over the Diamond M, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Josephine reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the frightened, desperate young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach to the confident wife, mother, and community member she had become. It hadn't been the life she had imagined for herself as a girl in Philadelphia, but it was so much richer, so much more fulfilling than anything she could have dreamed. And it had all begun with laughter, with a challenge to show her pride, and with the courage to take a chance on an unexpected future. For that, Josephine would be forever grateful.